And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Dragons!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers. Yep.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
We're just going to go over some of the players that could be potential replacements for some big injuries this past weekend. Also, Kenny Pickett getting his training wheels off in the second half of his game. We're going to talk a little bit about that and what that might mean for him. Also, teeing off with Jared Goff. Looks like he is here to stay and maybe more than just a waiver wire target. And also, where in the world did Kamara go? We'll talk a little bit about his injury and what happened with that coming up. But first thing first, we're going to dive right on into injuries. We got Jonathan Taylor kind of bummed up with a ankle injury this past weekend, which probably hurt quite a few people as he barely scored any fantasy points. Looks like he would not have practiced if they would have had practice on Monday. Those of you that are probably wondering what's up with that, well, they got a short week this week. They play Thursday again at Denver, which is a tough matchup in general, but the coach said that he would have practiced limited if it wouldn't have been a short week. And then there was no update as far as today, but while I'm recording this podcast, who knows if he will play. All the tests that they've done have been negative. There's been no severity update on the ankle injury, whether it's high or low sprain, mild or moderate or severe. There's really been no updates. They've been keeping it pretty tight-lipped, probably because they're playing on a short week. They don't want to give Denver any advantage to scheme against them. But it's kind of a wait-and-see thing right now. The coach did say today, if they would have been playing today, he would not play. But we still got today and tomorrow before we find out if his ankle gets good enough for him to play. I would expect him to be limited if he does play, and I would probably be looking for somewhere around flex value if he does get a chance to play. But if you have Jonathan Taylor, chances are you're probably going to need to start him, because even if you get that flex value out of him, that's better than nothing. And you always have that chance of him just falling into the end zone, which here as of late, that seems pretty rare, but there's always that chance. There's some positive regression there. Next guy we want to talk about, a guy that kind of disappeared on us, honestly. I got up Sunday morning to a notification that said Alvin Kamara was going to be out. And that was pretty much right before the game started. So Alvin Kamara was ruled out kind of last minute Sunday morning, which probably caught some people by surprise. I hope that if you had Kamara on your team that maybe you got up early enough to check that. Otherwise, you got a big fat zero, which probably was hard to overcome this past week with some of the other injuries and some of the other guys that did not play up to par. But hopefully you got him out of your lineup and got somebody in at the last minute. If not, there hasn't been any other update. I guess he's still battling that rib cartilage fracture. As some people know, if you don't know yet, that Latavius Murray actually played and actually had a decent game, put up around 10 fantasy points and scored a touchdown. And then after that happened today, turns out that Latavius Murray left the Saints practice squad, which he got sent back to after the game Sunday. And now he's signing with Denver, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Next guy I want to talk about is DeAndre Swift. Shoulder sprain, ankle sprain, did not play last week. And just to let all the Swift owners out there know, like myself, still no update as of this week, but I would not hold any optimism on that because as the coach had said, they pretty much expect him to be out after week 6, which is their bye in week 6. So there's no updates on that, but just plan to not have DeAndre Swift this week. So keep on doing whatever you had to do last week. If not, listen to some of our waiver wire targets we got coming up, and maybe you can nab one of those and plug them into your spot. Next guy I want to talk about is T. Higgins. They played Thursday night. He actually had a pretty big game, but at the end of the game, sometime in the fourth quarter, he tweaked his ankle. I don't know the severity. It just said that he had an ankle injury at the end of the game. They haven't updated anything about it at this time, but it is an ankle injury, and he did not participate in practice as far as I know as of this week. I would definitely keep an eye on this, considering that he missed the end of the game after it happened. But I would keep an eye on that and be listening to some of my waiver targets that might be affected to that. Next guy I want to talk about is Julio Jones. Played just a handful of plays Sunday, and then got banged up. Shocker there. I mean, the guy's falling apart, for Pete's sake. But he got out there, was having a knee injury. They haven't said if there was if it was a reoccurrence to the knee injury. All they said is Todd Bowles said that he got a little banged up, and that's why he was questionable. I don't think he's practiced yet this week. So if you got Julio, Chris Godwin came back and looked pretty good. Russell Gage was out there, didn't really do much. They still got Beasley on the sidelines. Mike Evans looked like a monster once again. So honestly, I don't know how many targets there are to go around for Julio. They did lose Cameron Brate to a concussion. So if he does somehow make his way back to play this weekend, that could help out a little bit. But just keep an eye on it. But he is banged up a little bit again. Next guy, Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen was somebody he practiced limited for a couple days back-to-back last week, and we thought he might have had a chance to play. And then all of a sudden he got ruled out Friday, and I thought that was kind of crazy because he had practiced limited a couple times. Well, turns out I was listening to a podcast today, and they were talking about the occurrence of this, and they were saying that Keenan Allen had a setback Friday, which caused them to list him as out after that happened. I have not seen an update as of the severity of the setback or if he's practiced any this week, but I would keep an eye on that if you're Keenan Allen owners. Not what you wanted to hear, but I would keep an eye on that. And if he is out again, it's just better news for Gerald Everett owners. And we'll be talking about him a little bit here later on in the podcast. Next guy I want to talk about is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Had an ankle injury, got ruled out fairly early last week, which is never good. That normally means you have somewhat of a moderate to severe injury when you get ruled out so early in the week. Hopefully this has been enough time for him to bounce back. There's been no news of any practice or anything like that so far. And unsurprisingly enough, it looked like Detroit's offense was still able to keep on rolling without him. But we know when he gets back in there, he's going to go right back to putting up a lot of points. But right now, no news on him. Still that ankle injury. If you got him, just kind of keep tabs to see if he gets back out there and practices any this week. And we'll probably update you on him a little bit later on in the week with our other podcast. Next guy I want to talk about, David Montgomery. Ankle knee injury, no news. Sat out this past week. Khalil Herbert started in his stead. Didn't really do a lot with his opportunity, but had a lot of opportunity. So, he had kind of a tough matchup, but had a lot of opportunity, which is good. No news on David Montgomery, but as we had heard earlier last week that it was deemed to be a possibly moderate to severe ankle/knee injury, which kind of led everybody to believe it was a high ankle sprain, which is normally a 2 to 4 week absence at a minimum. No update as of this time, but just kind of keep an eye on him to see if he practices any. I wouldn't get my hopes up given the news that we had heard last week, but keep an eye if you got him, and just kind of keep an eye out and listen. And then hopefully you got Khalil Herbert and you can fire him up. If not, if you got Khalil Herbert, he looked good enough. I still think he's going to have a role in the offense, even when David Montgomery comes back, but we'll just have to see. But I would not hold out hope for Montgomery to come back this week. Next guy I want to talk about, Jameis Winston. Throwing him in here, I'm going to try to talk about each team because there's several teams that have a lump of injuries. But Jameis Winston, back, hip, ankle, was ruled out fairly early last week. I think it was on Friday that he was ruled out. Andy Dalton ended up starting the game Sunday morning. Actually looked pretty okay. It took him a little bit to kind of get comfortable in the offense, but he threw some really good passes and looked okay during the game. Kind of looked like your typical game manager, which is personally what I think we need at this point with how our defense is playing. But we had several key players out with, Kamara and then Jameis Winston. Also, Michael Thomas, moving on to him, got ruled out also about the same time with a toe injury fairly early, which is not good given his history with lower extremity injuries. And a toe injury is never good for a wide receiver, as it's very vital to their planning and cutting and stopping during their routes. Really no updates on either one of them at this time in this week, but they're still on the report. They haven't been taken off. They didn't play, so I'm going to keep talking about them until they play. But Michael Thomas out, Jameis Winston out, Alvin Kamara out, and we still almost won the game, which was a miracle. But we didn't win off of a doinked field goal by Will Lutz that would have tied the game at the end of the game, but that's how it rolls. And honestly, if you would have told me Jameis, Thomas, and Kamara would have been out, I would have told you we probably wouldn't even been in the game at the end of the game anyway. Moving on, next team I want to talk about, I may as well say, it's going to be the Broncos, who lost Javonte Williams to a knee injury, tore his ACL, LCL, and the posterior corner of his knee joint, which is a monster injury. It actually happens to be the same type of injury that J.K. Dobbins had whenever he tore it his rookie season and was out for over a year, which does not bode well for Javonte Williams owners in any league, whether it be a standard redraft, whether it be a dynasty or a keeper league, because that means you're probably looking at Javonte being out for a year minimum. Hopefully he can bounce back. It's kind of sad because he's so young in his career and was starting to kind of get going, but these things happen, and with modern medicine as it is, we can, as we've seen with J.K. Dobbins this week, he can come back and still look like the player of old. But we lost Javonte Williams, and he's going to be out. So pretty much feel free to drop him unless you plan on keeping him or have him in a dynasty league. Then you might want to see if there's an IR spot open. That way you can slide him into that. Next guy on the team I want to talk about, Russell Wilson. Finally had a Russell Wilson-esque game this week, but emerges from the game with some right shoulder discomfort. The coach pretty much said he was just pretty sore, but they listed it under right shoulder. If they would have practiced Monday, which they had the day off because they played Thursday, he would have been limited. But he's pretty much just got primarily general soreness. The coach fully expects him to play Thursday, so no reason to worry. But it did look like Russell Wilson's back. Maybe he can carry that momentum of the offense over into this week against the Colts on Thursday. Next guy I want to talk about is Melvin Gordon, who inherited some of the work from Javonte Williams, but he was fairly limited in the game this past week with a neck injury. I don't know if it happened during the game or if it was something he's been dealing with, and they're just kind of holding him out to keep him healthy because of the Javonte Williams injury. But it says that he would have been limited if they would have practiced Monday, but they didn't, once again, because they had the day off because they're playing Thursday. But he would have been limited. I think they're just probably kind of letting him heal up, giving him some rest, putting this out there that he's probably going to be limited the rest of the week until Thursday, just to keep him healthy, because he should see a fairly large increase in workload with Javonte Williams going down. I don't know if he's going to get all of it. We're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get to our waiver segment, but he is limited with a neck injury, and I would keep an eye on that if it is something more serious, but I really don't think it is. I think that's just them being cautious with their starting running back at this point. Next guy we'll talk about, another terrible injury that's going to be somewhat prolonged, is Cordero Patterson. Come up with a knee injury. He was already kind of limited last week, but he ended up playing anyway. And then apparently he re-aggravated that knee injury during the game, and they placed him on IR after the game. And we come and found out today that he had a minor procedure after the game. So that really, honestly, if they put him on IR, that means he's going to miss a minimum of 4 weeks. And if he had a minor procedure, kind of sounds like he might have had a scope possibly, or he had his knee drained if it had a lot of fluid on it. One of those two things. If he did have a minor scope and they're just putting him on IR, then they're probably just, may have had a meniscus tear and they were cleaning it up or repairing it. something to that effect. They did not elaborate on the injury, but they put him on IR, which means he's going to miss a minimum of 4 weeks. And we'll talk about how that affects the Falcons here in just a little bit on the waiver segment. Next guy I want to talk about, Rashad Bateman, foot injury. Apparently, if you had Rashad Bateman, you were probably wondering at that point in the, what happened to him at the second half of the game primarily, which was the fourth quarter. Well, apparently that's what happened. Had a foot injury sometime in the third quarter, didn't play hardly at all in the fourth quarter during the game. And it was due to the foot injuries, what their coach was saying. We haven't got an update on the severity of the foot injury, if he practiced or anything. This is just what they were talking about after the game. I don't have any new news at this point in the podcast, but we will be updating you at the other podcast later on in the week on this injury. Next guy I want to talk about, Dak Prescott. They came out talking big this past weekend, saying that he might have a chance to play this upcoming week. Well, Dr. Jerry Jones got on the podium today and said Dak can still barely grip the football, but not like he needs to throw it. So it does not look like he's probably coming back this week. It does sound like he's getting more progressive in his recovery and rehab, but at this point doesn't look like he's going to play this week. Keep an eye on him. For some reason, if people are getting frustrated at this point and drop him, pick him up, slide him on your bench. I really don't think he's more than a week away from coming back. I've seen some videos of him, kind of trying to throw the ball and just kind of, I guess, tossing it around. He's getting there. It's just taking a little bit longer. Last guy I want to talk about, Hunter Renfrow. He was out again this past week, this will be 2 weeks if he sits out until Sunday. I would look for him to make unless he's got a severe concussion, I'd look forward to make some strides to come back to practice and kind of start jumping some of those clearance hurdles that he has to make it through in the protocol. And I would think he would have a chance, but there's been really no update on that situation so far. And that pretty much covers all of our major injuries that we, of all the major key players that we talk about. Primarily, we're only looking at people pretty much above 60% owned. And that pretty much covers all the main guys from this past week. We'll have some more updates on the main ones on our later podcast, but that's pretty much all the guys we got to talk about. So we're going to move on to our top waiver targets. After week 3. I like to throw that in there. Some podcasts, some shows say, week 5 waiver sorry, I said after week 3. I meant after week 4. But some guys like to say week 5 waiver targets because, you're targeting them before week 5. I like to say after week 4 just because we're targeting them after week 4. And you might not necessarily be using these people for week 5. These might be some people that you're targeting to stash on your bench for your bye weeks. So that's why I like to say top waiver targets after the previous week. And then obviously the same thing if you listen to our podcast for, these are all players that are owned in less than 60% of ESPN leagues. So if there's a key injury and players that you don't hear us mention, that's probably because they're owned in more than 60% of leagues. That does not mean that, they might not be out there on your waiver wire, but that's why we're not really talking about them in this column. I might make some mention of the people, because of due to injury, but as far as how we have them labeled out, that's why we don't have them labeled as some of the top waiver targets because they're owned in more than 60% of leagues already. So we're going to start with our running backs. Like I just talked about, obviously, if Melvin Gordon was owned in less than 60% leagues, he would be number 1 here, but he's not. So that's why Melvin Gordon's not number 1. But the number 1 guy I do have is going to be Tyler Algier, who's gotten a fair amount of run the last couple weeks. He's been getting a few more carries than he has in the past, and I think that's because Cordero Patterson seems to be kind of, I guess you could say, banged up. But the last, week 1, he was completely inactive. Week 2, he had 10 carries for 30 yards. Not that great, which didn't really get me all excited because of the inefficiency. But it was against the Rams, who are a pretty decent run defense with Aaron Donald there in the middle. Then the next week, they were playing at Seattle, which was a shootout, which explains why he wasn't used as much because he's not a really big pass catching running back. That doesn't mean he can't pass catch the ball, but when you got Cordero Patterson in the backfield, you're going to use him to catch the ball more than you're going to use Tyler Algier, the rookie. So he only had 6 carries, but for 25 yards, which is a little bit better yards per carry average that week. And then this past week with Cordero Patterson getting injured and fairly early on in the game, he had 10 carries for 84 yards, which is a great yards per carry, 8.4 yards per carry, which is a great average. And that was against the Cleveland front that didn't have Myles Garrett, but it's still a pretty decent Cleveland front defense against the run. And then he had 1 target with 1 catch for 20 yards, which you like to see. So maybe that'll give them some faith to pass them the ball a little bit more. Also in that same backfield, I've got in parentheses here for me, you had another guy that came on out of nowhere, honestly. His name's Caleb Huntley. You're going to hear a lot of people talking about him. He got in there, had the only touchdown out of the backfield, which, could be this or that. It really depends on what you're looking for. He's going to be competing, but I think they drafted Tyler Algier fairly high in the draft. He's been getting carries for the last 3 weeks. Caleb Huntley got none in week 3. And then this past week, he had 10 carries for 56 yards. And he had a goal line touchdown, but no targets, no receptions at all this season. So I really think if you're going to target somebody out of Atlanta's backfield, I really think you should be targeting Tyler Algier. And that's why he's my number 1, because he's pretty much going to get the most volume you're going to see out of all these guys on this waiver list right now. He's the one with the most guaranteed volume coming up. And be careful, though. Don't expect them to jump out in week 1 and probably light the world on fire. They're playing at Tampa Bay, who's got a pretty stout run defense. It's not the best in the league, but they've had a couple good weeks against some good running backs. So, and, Atlanta's offense is not exactly the most efficient, best offense in the league. So Tyler Algier at number 1. Number 2 running back, I got Raheem Mostert, barely flying under the radar at like 55%. Honestly, it's volume. He's come out and he's pretty much the number 1 guy there in Miami. We all know Tua is out this week. We might not all know that. I didn't have him on there because he didn't quite meet the threshold for percentage owned, but Tua has already been ruled out this week with a concussion. And that means they might lean a little bit heavier on the run. They're playing at the Jets, which is an okay matchup, but Raheem Mostert's getting pretty much 60-40% touches to Chase Edmonds, which is what you want out of an efficient offense like the Dolphins. So I got Raheem Mostert here at number 2. Number 3, I got Mike Boone coming in. It's kind of a dart throw, but honestly, Mike Boone has kind of been getting some catches in the backfield, even with Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon healthy. He's been getting 1 or 2 targets out of the backfield. And then last week after Javonte Williams went out, Mike Boone come in, and I believe he had 5 targets. Let me double check that for you. Yep. I'm sorry. Came in. He had 3 targets, but he only caught 1 of them. But still, he had 3 targets, caught 1, only had 3 rushes. But, Melvin Gordon got a bulk of the rushes, which is what I would assume would happen. Melvin Gordon only had 3. So looks like they kind of abandoned the run. I know for a fact that Russell Wilson actually ran more than he has all year. And that could be something we might see a little bit more also. Yeah. Let's see. Russell Wilson had 4 rushes this past week and 6 the week before. So he's still running a little bit as well. But I would keep an eye on Mike Boone. They did just sign Latavius Murray, which kind of worries me about Boone, because if they were planning on using Boone, I would think they would have signed somebody maybe from their practice squad or somebody that would plan to play special teams, because it's been well documented in the past that Latavius Murray does not play special teams. He only runs the ball. And so why would they sign Latavius Murray if they didn't plan to put him in the backfield and give him handoffs? Because most of the time when you sign somebody for depth, you're not signing them to just stand in. You only get handoffs. You're going to let them play special teams as an extra also, where they can contribute other than that, So with them signing Latavius Murray, It could be that Mike Boone will kind of keep his role because he does play special teams and plays it fairly well. So it could keep his small role in the offense and on special teams. And then it could be the Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray show. So Latavius Murray might be somebody you might want to target if you don't get Mike Boone, or if you don't have Melvin Gordon, or if you don't get Mostert or Algier. You might want to look at picking up Latavius Murray, put him on your bench, and just see what happens this week. But they are playing at home against Indianapolis on Thursday. So it's not going to give Latavius Murray much time to acclimate to the offense. So I would not expect him to do much this week. So even if you do get Mike Boone and he has an increased role, don't be surprised if his role takes a back seat to Latavius Murray next week. Moving on, and those two were kind of side by side as a 3A and a 3B. Moving on, the next guy I had him on the list last week, and I'll have him on the list next week until he's over that threshold, but it's J.D. McKissic. Still getting targets and catches every week, just like he did last year. Hasn't found the end zone, but when he does, then you're talking about a top 24 running back each week. Last week, 4 targets, had 3 catches for 16 yards, but last week he had 8 carries for 40 yards. So getting a little bit more involved in the running game. Just 8.6 points. But once again, when you're talking about a flex play or even just a dart throw at a wide receiver, a dart throw at a running back, you'll be happy with 8 points. I would have been happy to have 8 points, and I had Jonathan Taylor playing. I would have taken 8 points in that spot this past week, But he's going to get the pass volume there no matter what. And I'm going to have him on this list until he goes over that threshold, because I think he's going to eventually turn back into the player that he was last year. Then 5th on the list, Brian Robinson, who has not been activated off the IR yet, but they're saying that he has a good chance to play in week 5 coming up. So if he's still out there, which I think he's only owned in about 30% of leagues. We'll double check that for you. So if he's out there, now's the time to put him on the bench. Yeah, let's see. In ESPN, he's owned in 37.4% of leagues. So now's the time to put him on the bench and see what happens. Obviously, when he comes back, he's going to be limited, but with the way Antonio Gibson's been running the ball, they'd probably rather have just about anybody else out there running the ball, which is why they were giving more carries to J.D. McKissic. So Brian Robinson comes back. He's going to be fresh, and he looked good in the preseason. So, he could be somebody that could be a RB2 the rest of the way for you. And this offense can be pretty good. We've seen it in the past. They're not going to be that terrible all year. They've had some tough matchups the last couple of weeks. So Brian Robinson comes back. I wouldn't fire him up as soon as he gets back, but I would definitely pick him up and sit him on my bench unless you have to play him. I'd sit him on the bench, and I would be willing to bet he comes out, and when he does get a chance to play, he's going to do something. They're playing, and there is something else. They do have a really good matchup this week. They're playing at home against Tennessee, which is one of the worst run defenses. So that could be somebody, if he does, if you do have to play him and he comes back, might not be a terrible option. And then last guy I want to talk about this week, running back, is Rachaad White for Tampa Bay. The offensive coordinator came out and said that we want to get him more involved. And sure enough, they came out and got him way more involved, especially in the pass game. He came out this past week, 5 targets, 5 catches for 50 yards. Now, the bad thing is he only had 3 carries for 6 yards. So that's pretty much, Leonard Fournette's going to take pretty much all the carries. He's going to have, Rachaad White might have a few, but Fournette's going to have most of them. But 5 targets, 5 catches. We know in a Tom Brady offense, a pass-catching running back can do wonders, and Rachaad White might be that guy. The only bad thing, he lost a fumble. We know Tom Brady is not going to put up with any turnovers, just like the Bill Belichick era, and that might have been just as much Tom Brady as it was Bill Belichick. But 5 targets, 5 catches, you can't ignore that, and that was against Kansas City. This week they're playing Atlanta. If they, for some reason, go up big, I would not be shocked if they tried to save Leonard Fournette and gave Rachaad White more work. And we all know Atlanta's defense is not that great. And honestly, Tampa Bay's offensive line is starting to look better and better each week. And when you got Tom Brady at the helm he's always a threat to throw the ball, so they're not going to be able to stack the box too much. So Rachaad White might be somebody you might want to pick up. And if you need somebody, even on bye weeks, he could be somebody to plug in and get some catches and has a decent little floor there for you. That pretty much caps out all of our running backs. Another one I did want to talk about, depending on Jonathan Taylor's injury, which doesn't look like it's going to be much, is Deion Jackson for the Colts, rookie out of Duke. He has not done hardly anything all year because he's a rookie, obviously, but there's also Philip Lindsay there. Who knows if either one of them could see a role if Jonathan Taylor's limited or ruled out. But Deion Jackson and Philip Lindsay, but the bad thing is they play Thursday. So if you have anywhere that you're going to play them, unless you're a Jonathan Taylor owner, then you might not want to pick these guys up and play them so early in the week, just because they might have a limited role in the offense, especially with Nyheim Hines there. Even, after his injury last week, Nyheim Hines did not really receive that many handoffs. He has had a history whenever Jonathan Taylor was out in the past, gotten a few more handoffs, but for the most part, he's going to be pretty much primarily the passing back. And then I would expect either Philip Lindsay or Deion Jackson to get in there for the handoffs. Moving on to the wide receivers, I want to talk about Romeo Doubs, who's still not over 60% owned. I don't know why, because he had another great week again and clearly looks like probably the 1A to Alan Lazard being the 1B in that offense. I mean, he's constantly getting targets in the red zone and throughout the game. Even at the end of the game, Aaron Rodgers was keying in and looking at Romeo Doubs, which is, I mean, that's big for Aaron Rodgers to be. If he's looking for you at the end of the game and they're trying to win the game, I mean, that's monstrous. 8 targets. He had 5 catches, not as efficient as last week where he was 8 for 8, but 8 targets, 5 catches, 47 yards, but he got in the end zone for a touchdown. And he was out there for 96% of the snaps. I mean, he did have a fumble that he lost, which is another big thing for Aaron Rodgers. He does not like putting up with turnovers just because, that's losing offensive possessions for the team. But, I mean, 96% of snaps, 8 targets, 5 catches in the Green Bay offense. They are playing the number 1 pass defense in the league as of this far in the season, which is kind of crazy, but they're playing the Giants. And they are the worst for receivers in the league as far as points per game, which is kind of crazy. But I still think if you got Romeo Doubs on your team, he's a viable flex option right now, especially with all the injuries and all the players that are playing kind of poorly right now. I think you could fire up Romeo Doubs in the flex. I mean, I am in 2 leagues this week, even though they're playing the Giants. And I really think some of the teams that are playing the Packers are treating Alan Lazard as the number 1, which means he's getting the number 1 corner. And that means Romeo Doubs is getting the number 2 corner, which is always a good thing for an up and coming rookie. Next guy I want to talk about, George Pickens. Great week. Thanks to Kenny P coming in there, I think. Now, Pickens has been showing a lot of flashes here lately. Last week, he had 7 targets, but only 3 catches for 39 yards. We all know that was because Mitchell Trubisky was throwing on the ball, and Lord knows he can't throw a rock into a pond. But now we got Kenny P in there, comes in firing. And George Pickens goes 8 targets, 6 catches, 102 yards this past week, which is awesome efficiency. I really think Kenny Pickett and George Pickens, I mean, their names are almost synchronous. I mean, Pickens, Pickett, they were made for each other. So I think this is going to be one of those long-lived relationships between a quarterback and a wide receiver in Pittsburgh for a long time. But George Pickens, if he's out there, I'd go grab him up. Honestly, they're playing at Buffalo this week. And with Pickens, you really, he's still emerging. I think they're still going to be focusing in on Deion Johnson and probably Freiermuth as the primary pass catchers. But I think Pickens could have a decent game. I know Buffalo's pass defense is really tough, but we all know Buffalo's going to score against Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's going to have to throw the ball. So even, he could not have as great of a week as last week, but I still think he's going to put up some points this week, even at Buffalo. Next guy I want to talk about, Josh Reynolds. I mean, honestly, it's just key volume, bunch of injuries all at one time. Detroit lost 3 of their top 4 pass catchers in 1 week. Somebody had to catch the ball. Josh Reynolds was the guy, and he caught the ball. And honestly, I would only be focusing on Josh Reynolds as long as Amon-Ra St. Brown is out. But even when he comes back, he could have some volume. He could be overtaking DJ Chark at this moment. Because Josh Reynolds and Jared Goff have history. They played together when they were at the Rams. So they might have a little more chemistry than we've given them credit for. Last week, Josh Reynolds had 10 targets, 6 catches for 96 yards, which is, great. That was at Minnesota. This past week, 8 targets, 7 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown against Seattle in a shootout. Jared Goff has got confidence in Reynolds, and Reynolds is catching the ball with, some fairly decent efficiency. This past week, he was on the field for 84% of the snaps. I think Reynolds is a very good flex option, maybe even a wide receiver 2 play if they don't have Amon-Ra St. Brown and DJ Chark again this week, honestly, because they throw the ball so much and their defense is so terrible, they have to throw the ball so much. I think Josh Reynolds is somebody that could definitely be a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 play at New England this week, which is not a terrible matchup. In the past, New England secondary has been good, but they are not good this year. They're about middle of the road on pass efficiency. I think they're around 16th, 17th in the league. And Josh Reynolds could be somebody you could fire up. And maybe even if Amon-Ra St. Brown comes back, but not DJ Chark. If they all come back, I would probably not start him as more than a flex. I'd let him sit on the bench just to see if that chemistry he has with Jared Goff rolls on over into next week. These next 3 guys I got on here are kind of more matchup plays and wait and sees. Next guy I got is Michael Gallup at the Rams. Michael Gallup just came back this week. Looked okay. Obviously, since he's coming off that long injury, did not play a significant amount of the snaps, only 64%. But he got targeted 3 times, and they're obviously not passing the ball a ton with Cooper Rush because they don't. They're kind of leaning on their defense and their run game a lot to kind of, protect Cooper Rush because he's so young and not as refined as a passer. But he played 64% of the snaps, 3 targets, 2 catches, but 1 was for a touchdown, which means he's getting targeted in the end zone when he is in and probably coming in because he is a bigger wide receiver and more of a red zone threat than some of their other guys. But I would look for him to increase his snap percentage. Next week, they're playing the Rams. We know Jalen Ramsey's probably going to be shadowing CeeDee Lamb, which means Michael Gallup's going to be getting the second guy who I can't remember at this time, but he's doing okay. But honestly, the Rams have been getting torched in the pass game a lot this year. And if Michael Gallup's starting to ramp up a little bit more and more, I really think Cooper Rush could get a little bit more confidence. And we know he's been heavily targeting CeeDee Lamb. And if Jalen Ramsey's all over him, where are those targets going to go? Because if he's being heavily covered, Cooper Rush is going to start looking elsewhere. And I really think he's going to probably start focusing on Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz a little bit more in this matchup. And then we already talked, Dak Prescott's probably coming back next week. And when he comes back, we know Gallup and Prescott have a chemistry and CeeDee Lamb. And I really think they're going to go back to throwing the ball more than, more like 35 to 40 times a game because their run offense has not been that great. So Michael Gallup's might be somebody you want to pick up. I don't know if I'd play him this week unless you're in a bind, but he'd definitely be somebody to pick up, throw on the bench if you got the room, and just see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Next guy I got at 5 is Zay Jones, playing at Houston. Sat out last week with an injury. I believe it was an ankle injury. Let me just double check here. Ankle injury, but they come out today and said, I think he'll be ready to go for this next coming week. He was just really getting it going with Trevor Lawrence, and then he was out, and then Jamal Agnew stepped in and actually had a pretty decent game in Zay Jones' stead. But I think Zay Jones is going to come right back into that number 2 wide receiver set behind Christian Kirk, and I think he's going to dominate again, honestly. They're playing at home against Houston, who's been an okay defense against the pass, but not great. I think they're around 10 or 11. But the way that Jacksonville's offense has been playing against even better defenses, I really think that he's somebody, if he can come out and give you flex value this week if he plays. And I think them resting him up was the right thing to do to get him back 100%. And I think their offense is probably going to start thriving again. It looks like Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence have got this chemistry going. And I think this is going to be an offense that we're going to be talking about for a while as long as they're both healthy. Moving on to the next guy. And actually, these are 2 guys at the end here. Both of them are kind of dart throws. One could depend on injury. The other one's a short week, but has been looking better and better each week and has a lot of potential coming up. The first one I'm going to talk about, depending on injury, is Isaiah McKenzie, who was actually having himself a pretty decent game until he got knocked out last week with a concussion. But he had 4 targets, I think 3 catches with a touchdown last week. And then he got knocked out with a concussion. And I'm sorry. He had 6 targets, 4 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown last week, and was looking pretty good against Baltimore, and then got knocked out with a concussion. He's in concussion protocol. And with all the attention on the concussion protocol currently, I would not be looking for him to come back this week. It would be extremely soon. And honestly, with all the scrutiny and the changes in the protocol, I would imagine it's probably going to almost be a mandatory 1-week absence if you land in the concussion protocol coming up. They have not disclosed the changes in the concussion protocol yet, but I would be willing to bet that's going to be coming. And I would not plan on having Isaiah McKenzie. He would be somebody, if you have a bench spot, to stash, because his counterpart that was competing with him with snaps, Jamison Crowder, broke his ankle last week. So that throws out him of the mix of competing with McKenzie for snaps. And that means when McKenzie comes back, he's going to be the slot guy. Primarily, he's going to get all the slot snaps. And we know that Josh Allen likes to throw it to the slot. And McKenzie has been making plays out of the slot. So I think he's somebody that if he's out there to pick up and stash until he's healthy and could give you flex value. And if he gets enough snaps and enough targets, maybe even sneak in the wide receiver 3 category. And then last but not least, I want to throw out Alec Pierce out there in a offense that is struggling to run the ball with the Colts. Pierce has been getting more and more work. He's been kind of working his way back. He was actually in concussion protocol last week, and he just got cleared before the game and played 5 targets, 3 catches for 61 yards in week 3 against Kansas City. And then this week, 6 targets, 4 catches, 80 yards against Tennessee, which now Tennessee is one of the worst pass defenses in the league, but he still got 6 targets, 4 catches, 80 yards. That's a great yards per catch. And his yards per target was 13.3, which is a lot, honestly, in the league. And it looks like he's developing a little bit more and more chemistry with Matt Ryan, who's starting to look more and more comfortable in the offense. And also, he'll never have to see that number 1 cornerback with being on the same team as Michael Pittman. So that Alec Pierce had a lot of pedigree coming in, was a highly touted wide receiver out of Cincinnati. And honestly, he's a pretty big guy too, 6'3", 211, which bodes well for Indianapolis's wide receiving core, because both him and Pittman are really tall, really big guys. And I think that also gives him a little bit of an advantage in the red zone if necessary, because he could be with an advantageous matchup against a smaller cornerback. But Alec Pierce is somebody I'd be looking at. This week is not the best matchup against Denver's secondary, which is one of the best in the league. But they're primarily one of the best in the league because of Patrick Surtain, and we know he's going to be covering Michael Pittman, which probably doesn't bode too great for Michael Pittman this week. But it's also a short week, which means if Patrick Surtain is on Michael Pittman, Matt Ryan might be looking for elsewhere to throw the ball, and that could be more targets for Alec Pierce. That kind of rounds out my wide receivers for this week. Moving on to my tight ends, which honestly, it's kind of crazy because a lot of these guys we're talking about are top 12 tight ends. all the way through week 4 already. So I'm going to leave him at number 1. He was number 1 last week. He's going to be number 1 again this week, and that's Tyler Conklin. We were a little nervous to see how he would be used with Zach Wilson coming back. But, hey, he was targeted a lot again, especially for a tight end. Was targeted a fair amount with Zach Wilson. Had 5 targets, only 3 catches, but 52 yards, which means they were long targets, and he was 81% snap percentage, which is great. Now he does have CJ Uzoma coming back from injury. That does not mean that he's going to be completely overshadowed, because he's been so good this year for the Jets. I really think that he's going to be the guy, just because he's played so well, and they've been winning with him playing so well. Like I said, his target share went down a little bit, but I mean, he's still the number 9 tight end in PPR. So you could do a lot worse if he's, available out there for somebody that need to play. And they're playing Miami this week, which is one of the worst defenses for tight ends in the league. So if Tyler Conklin's out there, go pick him up. Number 2 on the list, we're still banging this drum, Gerald Everett. I mean, I don't know what else you need to see from the guy. Honestly, he could have been number 1. The only reason Tyler Conklin's number 1 is because he's less owned, and I feel like he's probably going to be available in more leagues. But Gerald Everett, number 6 tight end in PPR, number 4 in standard. Not that standard really matters anymore because it's almost irrelevant nowadays. But number 6 in tight end in PPR. Once again, we were without Keenan Allen. But honestly, I really think this usage continues with Keenan Allen, because week 1, he was still fairly used with Keenan Allen in there and was targeted in the red zone. But this past week at Houston, 6 targets, 5 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. I mean, you're not chances are you don't have a better tight end that you're playing unless you got one of the main ones. And even so, if I had Kyle Pitts, I'd find somebody else to drop it. I'd pick up Gerald Everett and play Gerald Everett until Kyle Pitts gets it going. I mean, that's all I can tell you, because he's been terrible this year so far, and Gerald Everett has been solid, and Justin Herbert's got a lot of confidence in him. He's throwing on the ball. All right, enough about Everett. I'm going to move on now. Next guy, David Njoku, on the list last week, going to be on the list this week. He'll be on the list next week until he gets over that threshold. He's got the athleticism, he's got the potential, and now he's finally starting to get the targets. Had another okay week, not as good as the week before, but still 7 targets, 5 catches, 73 yards. He did lose a fumble, which hurt him a little bit, but still 7 targets, 5 catches, 73 yards. I mean, he's beat Kyle Pitts still, another guy. I'd find somebody to drop. I'd drop him, pick him up, play him over Kyle Pitts. There's just not that many tight ends that are giving you this production every week. And honestly, if he would have got off to this start in week 1, he would be ranked higher. Right now, he's ranked the number 11 tight end in PPR. He would probably be top 10 if he wouldn't have had a 1 catch for 1 target week in week 1, because every week since he's been fairly decent. But yep, 7 catches, 7 targets, 5 catches, 73 yards last week. I would keep firing up. He's going up against the Chargers defense that has been banged up and just not looking that great. But their offense has been good. So, that Cleveland's going to have to pass the ball. And I think he's going to be in for another solid week. Next guy I want to talk about at number 4, Hayden Hurst. This is one of those that he's been on this list before, kind of got taken off because the wide receivers got healthy. But as we talked about earlier on the injury report, T. Higgins went down with an injury. I don't think it's going to affect him. I don't think it's going to affect Hurst as much as before, but he did see a little bump in targets this past week, and he did catch a touchdown, which means that Burrow was targeting him in the end zone. So, and normally, honestly, Higgins accumulates a majority of the red zone targets. And I think if he ends up being out, I think Hurst could be somebody you focus in on as a primary beneficiary of Higgins being out. Also, Tyler Boyd, who was not on the wide receiver section, he could be somebody that you might want to go and see if he's available. I don't know what his roster percentage is at this time. But if he is out there and Higgins sits, he might be somebody you want to pick up and play if Higgins ends up being ruled out. But Hayden Hurst, this is just a while Higgins is out thing. Same thing with Boyd. But if he's available and Higgins sits, he might be somebody you want to slide in there. Next guy I want to talk about is somebody that has been kind of flying under the radar a little bit, but he has been a relevant tight end in past years, and that's Will Dissly. Honestly, he's a part of an offense that none of us really thought was going to be that great, and ends up being the Seattle's offense has been fairly decent. Throwing the ball a fair amount. Geno Smith has been targeting him not a ton, but he is targeting him a fair amount in the red zone. And believe it or not, Will Dissly has a touchdown catch in 3 or 4 weeks. Had a touchdown catch in week 1, none in week 2, and then touchdown catch in week 3 and week 4. Last week against Detroit, 4 targets, 4 catches for 39 yards. Not a lot there, but he had a touchdown. And in today's age, if you can get a decent chance at a touchdown out of your tight end, he's definitely somebody you might want to look at, or even look at in daily fantasy leagues whenever you're throwing some daily lineups out there. But yep, Will Dissly at number 5. And last, I just got to throw him on here. I don't have a lot of confidence in him running forward, but he put up so many points last week, and that's Mo Alley-Cox for the Colts. Honestly, I don't think this is going to be something that we can consider is going to be consistent. Mo Alley-Cox, 3 targets week 2 to 1 catch, 3 targets week 3, 1 catch. Last week exploded for 6 targets, 6 catches, and 2 touchdowns. Honestly, I think this was more of just the Colts playing against a really poor pass defense in the Tennessee. They're playing against a lot better pass defense in Denver this week on a short week, but also it's been kind of a crapshoot for the tight ends over there at the Colts. They've kind of got to cut. They have a couple other younger guys that are getting targets as well, and I really think this was just Mo Alley-Cox week. But I had to throw him on here because anytime a tight end puts up 26 points in a week, catches 2 touchdowns, you can't help but mention their name, especially on a decent passing offense like the Colts. So Mo Alley-Cox, if he's out there in deeper leagues, or maybe all these other guys that we talked about are already gone in your league and you're just looking for somebody to stream. But Mo Alley-Cox, guys, if he's out there, don't be afraid to pick him up and at least roll the dice with him. You have a decent chance. But that pretty much rounds out all of our tight end help. Moving on to our last primary position segment is quarterbacks, which we're still pretty much calling the Dak Prescott replacements or Trey Lance replacements. But number 1, I'm going to beat this drum until this guy's over 60%. I still can't believe he's not. I guess that everybody's still a little gun shy on him from when he was at the Rams and even last year. But Jared Goff, the number 5 quarterback in fantasy and the number 1 quarterback this past week in points. And this week he's playing against a New England team that is not that great against the pass. I don't know what else to tell you. Honestly, I mean, there's a ton of quarterbacks that have not been great this year that I would pick him up and play him over. A ton of them. And honestly, he's going to be somebody that you probably want to pick up and set him on your bench and drop your backup quarterback, whoever it is, and play him during your bye week. As long as you don't have a week 6 bye week, because that's his bye week. But Jared Goff, number 1, far and away. And I've got him on several teams. And honestly, I'm playing him over several other players. I drop him for Matt Stafford right now. We've seen Matt Stafford looking terrible. I know that's crazy to say, as good as Stafford's been, but at this point in the year, if they can't figure it out, Jared Goff's playing too well to not be picked up and be playing and put up too many points. And his defense is terrible, so they have to be putting up points to try to win. And so Jared Goff, I would be looking for him anywhere you need help. Next guy I want to talk about, Trevor Lawrence. Did not have the best week this past week, but honestly, his points are a little deceiving. I believe he only put up 10 points, and that is primarily because he lost, I believe, 5 fumbles, and he threw 4 fumbles, and he threw 1 interception. That right there is minus 10 points, people. Minus 10 points. He only put up 5 fantasy points. That was in this league. Hang on, let me see what he put up in other leagues, because That is a 4-point touchdown league. Let's see. He put up, 9.66 fantasy points. All right. If he wouldn't have had 4 fumbles and an interception, he would have put up 19.6 fantasy points, depending on how your league does turnovers, but most of them are -2. So, but yes, 4 fumbles and 1 interception, which they say the weather was pretty terrible in Philadelphia, but which it seemed to affect Hurts as well. But still, Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson, the offense is going to get back on track. It's been great this year. He's still not owned in many leagues. They're playing Houston in a get-right game at home this week. Honestly, I really like Trevor Lawrence the rest of the year. I think he could be a top 12 QB and help replace some of these guys that have been injured for you. Next guy I want to talk about, Zach Wilson. We mentioned him last week, just like the other 2 guys ahead of him. Ended up coming out, had a great game this past week, which was kind of a surprise, but because I expected him to have a little bit more rust, but ended up he had a pretty solid game. Came out, played pretty well. Not as efficient as some of us might hope, 18 for 36, but playing at Pittsburgh, which is never a easy place to play at, but put up 252 yards, touchdown, 2 interceptions, but ran the ball twice for 15 yards. So, but I mean, still put up 20 fantasy points at Pittsburgh against a tough defense. And now he's going to play one of the worst pass, which is kind of crazy, but one of the worst pass defenses in the league in Miami. I think they're like ranked 30th so far, which they've had some really tough matchups against them. But honestly, New York's pass offense is nothing to throw shade at. They've been pretty good this year. And Zach Wilson has got the weapons to get the ball to, kind of like Tua did have the weapons to get the ball to in Miami, and Teddy Bridgewater will also. But Zach Wilson at Miami, great matchup. And honestly, he would be somebody, if he has a good matchup, is somebody I would stream all year. Every time he has a good matchup. Next guy I got to talk about, honestly, can't believe it, but I got to mention his name. Not somebody who I thought would be on this podcast, but that is Geno Smith. Currently the number hang on one second. Currently the number 11 quarterback in fantasy. That is correct. You did not mishear me. Currently the number 11 quarterback in fantasy. And I mean, honestly, he seems like he's the guy, they look like they're going to lean on him. Honestly, at the beginning of the year, I thought he was possibly going to be somebody that they were going to try to find a replacement for, maybe eventually trade for Jimmy G after the season got going. They realized that he was not who they thought he was. But the dude's got the offense rolling. Their defense is bad enough that they're not, stopping anybody from scoring. So I really think that Geno Smith could be somebody that you could stream against a good matchup, kind of like a Zach Wilson. Let's see. I'll get you some stats for him real quick. 1 second. Let me pull him up. And he should honestly also give a little bit of confidence to all the DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Rashad Penny owners, because he's playing at a clip where they somewhat have to respect him. He hasn't played the greatest defense the last couple of weeks, but I mean, he's the number 11 quarterback currently. Put up 35 points against Detroit, the number 2 quarterback last week behind Jared Goff. 23 for 30 for 320 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he's still running the ball a little bit. Ran the ball 7 times for 49 yards and a touchdown last week. Geno Smith, somebody, if it's a decent matchup, their defense, especially against a more high-powered offense and a little bit poor defense on the other team. I mean, but next week I would caution you, they're playing at New Orleans, whose defense has been playing okay, and their offense has not been playing that great. So it's probably going to be a lower scoring game and probably a little bit of a slower game. I would not expect a big game from Geno there. And not to mention the Saints defense is good enough with somebody like Geno. I think we've seen enough of him over the years that when he plays a good defense, not to get your hopes up, but the next week they're playing Arizona in week 6. If you got Jared Goff, fire up Geno Smith in week 6 playing against Arizona, the worst pass defense in the league in an offense that is okay. But honestly, Arizona's probably going to put up points against Seattle. So that's got a potential of another Seattle-Detroit matchup right there in week 6. But Geno Smith, enough about him. Number 11 quarterback currently. Fire him up in some streaming matchups if you need to. Next guy, Carson Wentz. I mean, he's been kind of a dud here lately, but he's still total the number 9 quarterback in fantasy. I mean, and that's kind of hard to believe because the last 2 weeks, I think he's put up 8 and 11 points, but he's still the number 9-11 quarterback in fantasy. So he's still throwing the ball 40 times minimum a game. Week 1, 41, week 2, 46, week 3, 43, week 4, 42 times. When you're throwing the ball 40 times a game, that amount of volume, you got to be owned. You got to be playing if in a good matchup. And this week they're playing who? The Tennessee Titans. One of the worst pass defenses in the league. Somebody that has been just getting raked every week. And they're playing at home against Tennessee. I look for Carson Wentz to have a pretty big week this week. I don't think he'll struggle again. Yes, he's down Jahan Dotson, but they still got Curtis Samuel. I look for Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel just to go nuts. Same thing with J.D. McKissick. And heck, if Brian Robinson gets out there, he might do something as well. And then, hey, at least then Antonio Gibson can worry about returning those kicks like the coach wants him to. But that's Carson Wentz at number 5. Next guy I want to talk about, Matt Ryan. I know, crazy. But, I mentioned the guy, Matt Ryan, at the beginning of the year, and then he goes out and throws up a 1-point clunker. But ever since he put up 1 point in week 2, or really he put up 4 points, depending on your league and with how you do turnovers. But week 1, he had 18 points. Week 2, 4 points. Week 3, 19. And then last week, 22. Last week, it was against Tennessee. This week, it's against Denver. But I think he's going to be somebody that's going to be very serviceable for you in your bye weeks or streaming against good matchups. Last week, he played Tennessee. We just talked about it. One of the worst pass defenses in the league. What did he do? 27 for 37, 356 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He did have 2 fumbles and lost one of them. I mean, if he could cut his turnovers down, Matt Ryan would probably be sneaking in there in the top 12. Also, if you take away that terrible week against Jacksonville, whose defense is severely underrated in my personal opinion. But anyway, he plays Denver this week. I don't think I'd start him on a Thursday night against Denver. But after that, he's got Jacksonville, Tennessee again, Washington, New England, the Raiders. I mean, he's got a slew of terrible secondaries. I wouldn't start him against Denver. Might think about starting him at home against Jacksonville just for the fact that he's already seen him. Being a veteran, he's going to know what looks they're probably going to try to throw at him, and he's going to be looking for some revenge because I think he's one of those guys that carries a chip on his shoulder like that. But he's somebody that I would not be shy about firing up if you've had a severe injury or in bye weeks. And last but not least, I got to throw him out there again just in case. Dak Prescott, if somebody dropped him before, or if they see that Dr. Jerry Jones said that he still can't grip the ball and they're starting to freak out and think that he's not coming back anytime soon and they drop him, pick up Dak Prescott. He's coming back. He's going to be good when he does because their offense needs him. But just be on the lookout just in case somebody drops Dak Prescott. And that pretty much rounds out my quarterbacks. Now I'm going to throw a couple DSTs and a couple kicking streamers. And honestly, the kickers are not streamers. These are guys that could stay on your team for the future as far as I'm concerned, because these guys have been studs all week and they're still less than 60% owned. But we'll start with DSTs, matchups alike. We got the Eagles at Arizona. Arizona has a decent offense, but their defense is terrible, which means Philadelphia is going to control the time of possession. Also, it's at Arizona, and if you look at Kyler Murray's history, has not had the best at-home play. I don't know why, but he just doesn't play that great at home in his past. But Eagles at Arizona, Eagles are playing really studly defense right now. A lot of teams they're just teams that are really going, really good on offense are coming up, like Minnesota, Washington, Jacksonville, and Detroit have all come up against Philadelphia and had pretty terrible games. Philadelphia's getting a ton of turnovers. They've got 5 fumble recoveries. They've got 5 interceptions on the year, only 1 touchdown on defense, which makes me think that they're probably going to, have some positive regression there. And that could be coming this week at Arizona. But I would fire up Philadelphia's defense against Arizona this week in a heartbeat. Next team I would not shy away from firing up is Jacksonville versus Houston. Jacksonville at home against Houston. And let's be honest, Jacksonville's defense has been really good. And hey, maybe we're not giving enough credit to Doug Peterson for getting that defense right. I don't even know who the defensive coordinator is there, but whoever he is, we should probably know, honestly, because if it's not Doug Peterson, it's that guy. They've been forcing a fair amount of turnovers. Their secondary, for Pete's sake, has 7 interceptions on the year already. And that was against Washington, the Colts, the Chargers, and Philadelphia. And, 3 of those quarterbacks are good veterans. And then you got Washington who, you got Wentz, who knows what he was thinking. But that was the first game of the year when his offense was really clicking. And they're going up against Houston. Davis Mills, who honestly has been underperforming for what a lot of people thought he would be doing this year. So I would think about firing up Jacksonville, who's the number 3 ranked defense on the year. I'd fire him up against Houston. Last week they sacked Jalen Hurts twice and intercepted him once for a touchdown. So, hey, fire up Jacksonville's defense against Houston this week. Last but not least, defense, I'd fire up Vikings defense against Chicago. We know they took advantage of Andy Dalton last week. They had an okay week. Honestly, they've been a pretty mediocre defense, but they're playing a Chicago defense that runs the ball, doesn't throw it but 20 times a game, which means it's going to be a short game, because that means you're going to take a lot of time off the clock running the ball a lot. And Minnesota's offense looked to get its groove back last week against New Orleans. They moved the ball well, and I think they're going to control the time of possession, which is going to give their defense a lot of breaks. And they're playing at home. And Minnesota has always been a kind of a tough defense playing at home. So I would look for them to kind of get it going. And they've been sacking the quarterback a fair amount. Looks like they've got 9 sacks on the year. And I think if you get pressure on Justin Fields, he does not perform very well throwing the ball. And their defensive front is good enough to shut down the run, which is all Chicago has, honestly. And that pretty much rounds out defensive streamers for this week. Moving on to kickers, number one last week, and he's still the number 1 kicker so far, and that's Young-Ho Koo for Atlanta. They're playing at Tampa Bay this week. Tampa Bay is going to probably put up some points against Atlanta, and I think Atlanta might be able to move the ball okay against Tampa Bay. But against that tough front, I think that they're going to have to settle for more field goals than they would like to. So I think Young-Ho Koo continues what he's been doing. He's going to keep staying the number 1 kicker. And I'm going to keep saying he's the number 1 kicker to pick up until everybody picks him up and he's above 60%. Next guy I want to talk about is somebody that I mentioned last week. And I don't know if I mentioned the week before or not. I have to go back and look at my notes. But Brett Maher for the Dallas Cowboys. For one, he kicks for the Cowboys, which they kick in a dome, and you can't ever go wrong there. 2, he's the number 3 kicker in fantasy leagues right now. So, and this week they're playing the Rams, who honestly have still looking to get their offensive groove back. I don't think it's going to happen for them this week against the Cowboys. And I really think the Cowboys can move the ball against the Rams defense. And they have a good front 7, which means they're going to stop the run a fair amount, which could lead to more longer third downs, which could lead more field goals to, less first downs. So I think that Brett Maher is a solid pickup for a kicker. Third, who was on the list, I think he might have been third last week, is Ryan Succop for Tampa Bay. They're playing at home versus Atlanta. Succop's been a very good fantasy kicker so far this year. Let me see, and I'll tell you where he's ranked. He's ranked the number 5 kicker in fantasy so far, and I think he's going to keep kicking field goals because Tom Brady is going to keep moving the ball, getting him in position to kick those field goals. So, and they're playing against Atlanta, which we know that Tampa Bay's offense is going to be able to move the ball against them. Should give him plenty of opportunity. And then last but not least, Greg Joseph. Definitely somebody we've mentioned before, had a great week last week against the Saints. Obviously, kicked the most field goals he's ever kicked in a game at 5. Of course, it was against the Saints. Who else would it be against? Kicked 5 field goals last week, made all 5 of them for 17 points. And, you know, he had a couple rough weeks 2 weeks before, but he's playing Chicago this week. I think they're going to move the ball against him. Chicago's got a decent defensive front, which makes me think they could end up having to settle for some more field goals, kind of like they did in week 1 against Green Bay and like they did against New Orleans, who have also really good defensive fronts. And this time they're playing at home in the Dome in Minnesota. So I'd fire up Greg Joseph, and I think he's got a good chance at putting up some good fantasy points for you at kicker again. And that's pretty much going to wrap up the injuries and waiver wire podcast for Chasing the Trophy. If you don't mind, go follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, Castbox, whatever you like to listen to podcasts. Set it to automatic download for us if you don't mind, because we're trying to get our downloads up. And keep following us for podcasts. We'll be back later on in the week for our studs, duds, and overachievers with Josh Williams and our sit, starts, and sleepers with Josh Williams. I won't be flying solo later on, and we're going to come at you with starts, sits, and sleepers. And we'd appreciate if you come back and listen to us. Thanks, and have a good fantasy week.